Welcome back to the channel. This week's video is the structural collision repair process on a Tesla Model 3 from start to finish. We'll be replacing the end panel, floor, upper and lower rail brackets, the rail end, and the floor extension. All repairs will be completed on the Celette frame bench. Keep watching to see how the Celette jigs work during the collision repair process, building the vehicle back to OEM specifications. If you're interested in learning more about the collision repair process on Teslas, hit that subscribe button in the upper right hand corner. The end panel spot welds and SPRs are now ground down using a belt sander, while the spot welds attaching the lower quarter extension to the end panel are drilled out using a 6.7mm drill bit. A Mac torch is then used to help release the structural adhesive while separating the end panel with a seam buster. With the end panel removed, we start cutting out the rear floor. The spot welds are ground down before cutting the lower portion out with a hacksaw. This gives us access to remove the remaining upper flanges with a seam buster after warming up the structural adhesive. All the spot welds attaching the rail end plate to the vehicle are now ground down using a belt sander with 80 grit before using a seam buster and slide hammer to remove the part. With the end plate removed, we can now remove the upper and lower rail brackets from the rail. All the remaining adhesive is cleaned off before test fitting the new rail end plate and brackets to the Celette jigs. The floor and end panel are now both test fitted to the vehicle, confirming the fitment of all the structural components. All the rear bumper retainers are now installed before test fitting the rear bumper cover. The Celette jigs needed to be disassembled to allow access for the rear bumper cover to be attached. Afterwards, the new trunk is test fitted on the vehicle to confirm proper fitment between all the panels. With the vehicle fitting and the test fitting process completed, we now take apart the vehicle so we can begin prepping for the installation of the rail end plate and the two rail brackets. A quick clean is performed on all mating flanges on the vehicle before mounting the rail end plate and brackets to the Celette jigs. We can now start drilling all our rivet locations, as these parts will be bonded and riveted together following the OEM procedure. There will be two different styles of structural rivets, a 6.5 mil rivet and a countersunk 6.5 mil rivet. After reviewing the procedure, I realized I forgot to remove the right side rail extension. This piece needs to be removed for the rivet gun to have enough access to install the rail brackets and end plate. All the mating flanges for the rail end plate and brackets are cleaned to prep for structural adhesive. The structural adhesive is then spread on all the parts and the vehicle body. An additional bead of structural adhesive is then applied before fitting all the parts on the vehicle using the Select jigs. The Express 800 rivet gun is now used to compress all the structural rivets. All the rail pieces are completed and the structural adhesive is left to dry for 24 hours. The rear floor is now installed before mapping out the locations for the 6.5 mil structural rivets. All the rivet locations are then drilled using a 1/8 drill bit followed by a 6.7 mil drill bit. The rear floor is now removed and we will start prepping the underside to match the original. The floor is scuffed with a red Scotch-Brite and then masked off for seam sealer. Seam sealer is then applied and a brush is used to match the original brush strokes. The floor is now sent to the paint department to have the underside painted. While we wait for the floor to be completed, we start prepping the right side rail extension by drilling holes for the 11 4.8 mil rivets. All mating flanges are now cleaned using a belt sander with a Scotch-Brite belt. Structural adhesive is then applied, wiping it on all mating flanges before applying an additional bead. The Express 800 rivet gun is then used to compress the 11 4.8 mil rivets. The underside of the floor is now painted. All mating flanges on the new floor and the vehicle are now cleaned using a belt sander with a Scotch-Brite belt. Structural adhesive is applied and the new floor is installed using the Express 800 rivet gun to compress the 6.5 mil structural rivets. The installation of the floor is completed and the structural adhesive is left to dry for 24 hours. The studs are now knocked off the rail brackets to test fit the new end panel. These studs will be replaced with new bolts and nuts as per the OEM replacement procedure. The end panel is clamped into place after installing the select jigs. With the end panel clamped and fitted using the select jigs, the flow form and 6.5mm structural rivet locations are marked out following the replacement procedure. The 6.5mm rivet locations are now drilled using a 1/8 drill bit followed by a 6.7mm drill bit. The holes for the flow form locations are then punched using the Express 800 rivet gun. All the mating flanges are now mapped out using a paint pen to know exactly where to prep for structural adhesive. The end panel is then removed and all mating flanges are cleaned using a belt sander and an angle grinder. Structural adhesive is now wiped on all mating flanges before applying an additional bead. The end panel is then installed on the vehicle, clamped into place with all the rivets put into their drilled or punched holes. The select jigs are then bolted on before using the Express 800 rivet gun to compress the 6.5mm structural rivets and the S18 flow form rivets. The end panel installation is now completed. The structural glue is left to dry for 24 hours before removing all the clamps. All the squeezed out structural adhesive is then cleaned off using a belt sander and an angle grinder to prep the vehicle for the paint shop. All the structural repair work has been completed and the vehicle is now lifted off the select frame bench. The trunk and hinges are now unbolted and removed from the vehicle. The welding blankets and 3M spark paper is then removed off all the roof glass, and this vehicle is now ready for the paint shop. Masking tape is now used to tape off all the areas for seam sealer. Seam sealer is then wiped on before using a brush to match the original brush strokes. The vehicle is now back from the paint shop. The assembly process is started by bolting the rear rebar to the vehicle using the new bolts and nuts. Afterwards, all the rear bumper retainers are bolted on and the quarter air vents are installed. The rear wiring is now installed back through the inner wheelhouses, and all the wiring connectors are plugged back in on the lower floor and the end panel. Afterwards, the end panel weather strip is installed. The right inner quarter trim panel is now installed, followed by both trunk hinges, which are attached from underneath with 3 13mm nuts. The right body side molding is now installed, followed by both body weather strips and the B-pillar applique. The quarter liners and rocker covers are now attached on both sides of the vehicle. The charge port harness is unbolted to have enough access to install the charge port door. The high voltage system has been disabled, and the high voltage gloves are being worn when working with the charge port harness as a safety precaution. Time to install some interior components, which includes the left quarter trim panel, the rear seats plus the seat cushion, and the seat bolsters on both sides. The left body side molding is now installed, followed by both body weather strips and the B-pillar applique. The rear bumper cover is now attached back on the vehicle. After all the bumper fasteners are reinstalled, the taillights are attached with 2 8mm nuts and a screwed on plastic bump stop. The trunk wiring harness is now all connected, and all the trunk components are installed to complete the assembly of the trunk. Afterwards, the striker is adjusted from the inside of the vehicle while closing the trunk to make sure the trunk opens and closes perfectly without any drag or tension on the striker. A water test is performed outside to confirm no water leaks are present. After the vehicle passed the water test, 3M cavity wax is sprayed on the backside of all the repairs as a rust prevention measure, followed by the remaining interior components being installed. The tailgate T-badge is now installed, and this vehicle is complete and ready for the detail department. Subscribe and stay tuned for new videos every Friday.